thee who came with clear signs and the scriptures and the book of enlightenment.
No, that's not it. The one that says that the one that you will be tested in your property and in yourselves, and you will indeed hear from people of the book.
Oh, okay, yeah, 186. Thank you, Brother Hamoudi.
186.
You shall certainly be tried and tested in your possessions and in your personal selves, and ye shall certainly hear much that will grieve you from those who receive the book before you and from those who worship many gods. But if ye preserve patiently and guard against evil, then that will be a determining factor in all affairs. And there you go. There's patience.
And
yeah.
And it clearly commands to patience. I can even tell you from chapter 4 of Quran about women in ayah 34 that it says, God clearly commands, says, do not kill yourselves. It says, do not kill yourselves. God is kind to you. So that's right there. That's an ayah against suicide bombings. But again, the terrorists or the extremists, what they do, they rationalize their jihad. So they say this is what we can do, even though Quran clearly says don't kill yourself. God is commanding you not to
Manu,
kill yourself. God is kind to you.
Manu, I understand your viewpoint, and you're good at bringing up the verses that are nicer in the Quran, and we appreciate that, the verses that sound more pluralistic and kind. Of course, you understand very clearly, and so do Muslims who study, the idea of abrogation, and you realize that these Muslims who tend to be more let's say, orthodox or at least stronger in their literal interpretation of the Quran, would say such passages as you just shared and let there be no compulsion of religion have been abrogated by the ayah of the sword, Surah Al-Tawbah, Surah 9:5, and also 9:29 and others. And so they feel every bit and even more justified in the way they treat Christians and Jews than you do in these verses, especially, Manu, since the weight of Islamic tafsir and historical commentary is with those who say such peaceful verses have been abrogated and you are now supposed to follow the verse of the sword.
I do realize that because I've had conversations with Muslims on campuses here where I live in Michigan, in a couple of campuses, and I know their mentality. Some of them, they could be extremists, and they would even view me as a fellow Muslim to accuse me even that I'm not the best follower of Islam because they want to put so much emphasis on the commentaries.
Right.
Even though to me the commentaries can be discounted because majority of them are not even by two people living at the same time as the Prophet, and two of them independently saying something. A lot of the commentaries are by one person, 50 or 100 or 150 years after the Prophet, and then other people going back to that original commentator and making their own comments about that person's comments. So,
right. Well, Manu, let me ask you for time's sake. Thank you for explaining that. Let me ask you for time's sake, Manu, why do you think that throughout the world today, when something like that thing, now we as Christians certainly object to a thing that displays Christ in a bad way, as I think I remember the particular art that you were talking about. You know, we're very offended, and we pray for those people, and we're really sad, and if we can, we work through the government and through the law to try to not fund those type things with tax dollars, but we try to do it, generally speaking, in a peaceful way. Why do you think it is, Manu, that around the world so many Muslims, not just isolated groups, but when something like the cartoons come out, and look, of course, you know, Muslims don't even believe Muhammad is God. We believe Jesus was God in the flesh, but Muslims around the world react in violence, burning things down, killing, pillaging, whatever it may be, marching in the streets, destroying Western businesses in Muslim countries. Why do you think there is that difference? I realize that there are peaceful Muslims like you who bring forth the peaceful verses from the Quran, but you're hard-pressed to find many Christians who took to the streets and killed and beat people up and torched embassies and everything else after that display, but in the Muslim world, it was pervasive all over the world, this violent reaction. Why do you think that is?
I believe Muslims are spiritually and to some degree, without putting, I'm a Muslim myself, I don't want to put the community down, but they're spiritually and at the level of thinking and reasoning are at the same place that, for example, Christians were at some point, like in the 1400s, or where the Jews were before the Messiah Jesus came. Because I think one of the best things the Muslims could do, and I know I don't agree with the writings of Paul, as very, very little of it, but at least if a majority of the Muslims would read the four Gospels and see what Jesus said, at least his own words, which they're in some of the Gospels are in red, so if they can even read the red ink, so to speak, they can at least see what the one that they believe in, and that was God's Messiah, how he came and tried to give wisdom and understanding to the Jews who had themselves not understood some of the wisdom and the compassion in the Torah. Because at that time, the Jews were also leaning toward if the person had sinned, that was their punishment, or they were not taking care of the less advantaged people in the society, like the lame or people who were diseased. They would seclude them, and that's why the Messiah came to open their eyes that some of the things that they were putting so much emphasis on were not actually needed to be emphasized. What God wants of men is to be compassionate and to treat each other good and to find their way and to strive toward God. And I think that the best thing that the Muslims could do, not only to understand Quran in its right balance, but also to read at least the four Gospels and see what the Messiah said, because even if they don't believe, let's say, 20-30% of it, at least I'm pretty sure a lot of Muslims would be surprised that they would agree with over 50% of what Jesus said in the Gospels, because they're very, very, it would open their eyes what the religious authorities were doing, and how Jesus came to tell them that how you have to have a certain right view of the religion and how to treat people.
Manu, thank you so much for your comments. We're going to have to go to a break, but I want to ask you one final question, and I'll give you a little bit of time to answer as you feel led, and then we have to go to a break. When you talk about God and when you talk about your view of what right religion should be, aside from the fact that you're a Muslim and you quote the Quran and I'm a Christian and I quote the Bible, there's a lot of similarities in this idea that God is love and compassion, and we shouldn't hate our enemies, we should pray for them, we should be patient with them. Here's my question for you, Manu. Now, I know you're an honest man. Unlike some of the Muslims who call in, we ask them, give us one verse in the New Testament that teaches Christians to go and spread their faith by the sword. You know the New Testament well enough to know that there is not one verse in the New Testament, okay, that says for Christians to go and spread their faith by the sword. There's not one. Now, don't you find it interesting, at least, given the New Testament that we have, whether or not you believe it, that in the entire New Testament there is not one such verse, but in the Quran there are still many such verses, and there is no difference, this is old and this is new in the Quran, unless, of course, you agree with the idea of abrogation. So don't you find it pretty striking that in the entire New Testament there is not one verse that teaches Christians to go and be violent, and we don't see Christians today, generally speaking, there's very few that go and react to blasphemy and kill people. But we find Muslims with the Quran, with many verses that are violent, still in the Quran, and so many Muslims react violently. Don't you see that there is a stark difference and contrast there?
I do see that, but also I understand that understanding any religion in its right balance takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and the teachings of Islam as a whole, they are not like a pirate mentality or a lawless mentality that sometimes for, I don't know, sometimes when I watch your programs or Jesus or Muhammad programs, I get a sense that you, or David or Sam, you oversimplify situations, and it gives the impression to people that it's a pirate or lawless type of mentality. But as a whole, Islam is a very balanced religion in terms of you have to have certain rules for yourselves and for treating other people. Where some of these extremists go wrong are where they try to justify what they really want or how they want to conduct themselves by their religion. And I think that's the biggest misunderstanding of trying to view what is the true Islam or what is the true teachings of Islam. And I think that's the biggest barrier between Christians understanding Muslims and Muslims trying to explain themselves that what is the true Islam.
Well, Manu, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank you, and I can say this, I think, with a clear conscience. If more Muslims in the world were like you, we might not even have to have this show. But I want to say one more thing, and that is, Manu, I think what you're saying has some truth there, but when we look at the example of Muhammad and the source information, I don't see a very peaceful individual. I see someone who led raids. I see someone who, unlike Jesus, who didn't have any wife at all, Muhammad had many, many wives, and even some of his followers questioned his moral integrity in this matter, although privately. And so I think even what you said, there's some truth there, but we still have to deal with the example of Muhammad and the closest hadith that were there of his companions. And we see still, brother, a stark contrast between Jesus and his life and Muhammad.
If I could make one comment.
Go ahead, and then we'll go to a break.
One of my biggest barriers to Christianity, besides what I've understood from Quran, and my personal belief is that Christianity's message evolved after the Messiah was taken up to heaven, because people had to make sense of his mission. So Matthew 24:5 and Matthew 7:13. Clearly, Jesus is not preaching a message of believe in me, everything's going to be fine. He says the narrow is the gate. And also, Matthew 24:5, Jesus himself is predicting that he says, many will come in my name, not anybody else's name, in my name, and proclaim that I am the Christ, meaning that they are most likely Christians, and they're going to mislead people. So I don't believe the Christianity, all sorts of Christianity, as you know, there are 90 different or more denominations in this country, and some of them emphasize the work, some of them emphasize the grace, and there are different doctrines that each church kind of emphasize one over the other.
Well, Manu, here's the thing, though. Well, let's not just look at the doctrines of particular denominations, or look at the Shia and the Sunni and the Hanbali and the Hanafi and all of that. Let's look at the source documents. And we have a Bible, the New Testament. Most all of it can be traced back. We have either fragments or whole books or whole parts within most of it, within 30 years of when it was written. Most of it, not all of it. Some of it more like 60 years, like Revelation and the epistles of John. But most of it within 30 years of when it was written. The Quran, you do not have fragmentary evidence of the Quran from 30 years after the time of Muhammad. And so when you're talking about this is something that came along later, what you're saying would have to go exactly the same way for Islam. But I don't believe that. I believe the New Testament is what Jesus said, and I believe that the Quran, for the most part, is what Muhammad said. And when we look at the two, there is a stark contrast, Manu. Neither you nor I nor anyone can deny that. They're supposed to be from the same God. They're radically different. The messages are different. The lives of the men are different. The miracles and no miracles. The one in a grave, one in heaven. Completely different. But Manu, I'll pray for you. I thank God for you and look forward to hearing from you again on the program in the future. All right, well, that's about it for right now. Let's take a break, and we'll come back to hear more of your views on the news Muslims are making around the world today.